Before humans were able to create, if I can call it that, babies or reproduce, we see the original creation story starting in Genesis chapter 1. Creation is a fascinating concept. Humans have dreamt of creating from day one. AI, or artificial intelligence, is kind of a broad scientific field that includes anything related to making machines smarter. In the Bible, in biblical context, the only person that can create is God. Humans, when we are created in the image of God, can only make, not create. If we believe in a God, we believe in a God who can create something out of nothing, but we also believe in a God that was present before the chaos. If you are going through chaos in your life, artificial intelligence may help to make some order, but it can't solve the chaos. Okay, good morning everyone. Today will be more of a Bible study than a sermon, so feel free to ask questions, or if you want to read, or if you have something you want to ask as we go through, feel free to put your hand up or just shout out. It's going to be more of a session to just explore a concept and a topic, one that I work in currently, so it's something that I can use on a daily basis, but one of interest obviously as we go through. But I'm praying that as we walk through, that it's really an opportunity to think a little bit more around also the biblical concepts, not just a topic and something that's interesting for discussion. So let's bow your head. If you can bow your heads with me, we just say a quick word of prayer and then we go into the sharing for this morning. Father, we thank you for this time again. We are grateful for the opportunity to come to you. May you be with us here. May you open our minds as we learn and as we explore your word this morning. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So the sermon title is, In the Beginning Did God Create AI? What do you think? Do you think yes or no? It's a trick question. Maybe one that doesn't have an answer. But we're going to discover a little bit about what this concept of AI is. Many of you will have a vast understanding already. Perhaps you use it on a daily basis. But we're going to delve into some of the biblical principles as we go through. Now, on a daily basis, not all the pictures in this presentation are made by AI, okay? This is a real photo. You can guess the ones that are made by AI and the ones that aren't. In my line of work, I get to play with babies on a regular basis. Most people will say that babies are an example of the creative power of humans. Babies come out of nothing, or so to speak, right? One day there was no baby, and the next day, or 9 months later, there was a baby. Right? One day there wasn't Celine in our congregation, and then a few months later, Celine appeared. Most people will reference the creation of a baby as part of not only just God's creative power, but the ability for humans to create. Now, we are going to look at the Bible verse, that the scripture reading that we had this morning, as we delve into Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. So if you have your Bibles, that's where we are going to reference. There are only 2 or 3 Bible verses this morning, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth. So Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, we are going to look at the true creation story. Before humans were able to create, if I can call it that, babies or reproduce, we see the original creation story starting in Genesis chapter 1. Now some of you will have already memorized this verse, some of you will not. It's on the screen, you have your Bibles. Very popular verse, I think Gordon's favorite verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. For many of us, creation is a fascinating concept. Humans have dreamt of creating from day one. I don't know if you were like me when I was a kid. I wasn't so interested in the creation of planets and stars and galaxies. I was interested in the creation of Lego, buildings, things that you could build. Humans have a creative streak that has come from a place where God has put that in us, and we'll cover that a little bit as we go through today. But even before that, God created the heavens and the earth. Can you remember one of your earliest creations as a kid? What did you create, Fred, when you were young?
I was drawing maps and then.
Okay, Fred likes to draw.
Urban.
Urban planning, okay. Heinrich, what did you create when you were a kid?
Drawing cars.
Drawing cars, okay. May, what did you create when you were young? Can you remember? Coloring book and drawing. The creative spirit has been in there, and we see that God's creative spirit comes right back from Genesis. Now, in this day and age, people are starting to say artificial intelligence, robots are now taking over this creative power. Some people say they're good, some people say they're not so good. But as time goes along, we see this evolving in a regular cycle that seems to be shorter and shorter in terms of improvement. At first, it took them a long time to just develop a computer, but in the last few years, you would have seen an incredible explosion of this concept called artificial intelligence. Now, most people equate artificial intelligence to ChatGPT or a similar, what we call a large language model. And I'll do a little bit of explanation just so it gives you some context before we go into the rest of our kind of study today. So people say artificial intelligence is ChatGPT. That's technically not quite correct. It's partially correct because in 2022, when this came out, the world started to realize the creative power or so-called creative power of artificial intelligence. People started using for all sorts of things. You can create or write your essay for your school assignment. You can create or write an Instagram post. You can now build a website in a few minutes. You can do all sorts of creative things by using artificial intelligence to help you. Generative AI is a branch of the machine learning component of artificial intelligence. It's a bit scientific. I'll go into a diagram to help to illustrate it in a second. It's developed through pattern-based learning based on data models. And without human direction, it can actually cobble things together. The quality of the model determines the quality of the output. This is how generative AI works. Very scientific explanation here, but hopefully I can make you understand a little bit more. So here's the diagram. I like this diagram better. AI, or artificial intelligence, is kind of a broad scientific field that includes anything related to making machines smarter. Okay? So there could be robots, could be computers, could be different components. We see it in all sorts of machines in my line of work. There are a few different parts of AI, and they kind of put all these acronyms together. Natural language processing is the branch of AI focused on teaching humans to understand, interpret, and generate human language. So natural language processing you use for writing an essay, for example, or creating or recognizing how words and sentences go together. Machine learning is a subset of AI that involves systems that learns by themselves. So the machine starts to learn what to do. And that is probably where we spend most of our time now using AI, which is really generative components where machines have learned how to do things. And then the little kind of green dot in the middle is called deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning that uses models to predict. So if you've ever done research or academia or you're interested in these scientific things, this is called neural networks. They start to create like an artificial human brain to really go deep down into the very complex patterns without human involvement. So it's all very scientific. But for us, we spend most of our time, the pointer's not working, but we spend most of time in this kind of machine learning side where we use AI on a regular basis to ask different things, whether it's Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, OpenAI, whatever you use to actually look for your answers and help. Now, I mentioned that AI is very powerful. It helps me a lot in my line of work in healthcare. There are a whole range of things that it can do. There are a whole range of things that it starts to do. You can see all the different things that it's helping with equipment, with assistance, with helping us to be faster at our work, helping us to be more accurate at what we do. There are things that AI can do that I can't do in the same speed. For example, it can start to interpret the X-rays based on pattern recognition, the whole range of different things. On Friday, I was at a conference where we're looking at how they can listen to a conversation between a doctor and a patient and be able to then create a note, create a letter, file certain things in a medical record, and even give you the suggestions of what you should do next for the patient. So AI is powerful because the machine starts to learn how it can actually help to be not only more effective, but also more efficient at you doing your role or your job. There are different ways that we use AI. Here's another example. This one I use for my work and just give you lots of different things. And so the longer it goes, the more use cases we find for artificial intelligence, whether it's in my line of work or your line of work, people start to think that machines are developing a creative power. Now, you may or may not agree with this, but how as Christians should we look and interpret this? In fact, someone even did a humorous example of creation. It gave a prompt to ChatGPT to say, please write a Bible verse in the style of the King James Bible explaining how to remove a peanut butter sandwich from a VCR. And here's the example. So you've got an example of a Bible verse, not really Bible verse, that's been created by a large language model, a machine, because it's learned how King James Bible language is structured. And here's the output, right? You know, you can read it. It's a bit funny. So people are saying, well, artificial intelligence is actually creative. It has creative power. I mean, it probably wrote this thing better than I could. If I asked you to do the same thing, Lizzie, do you think you could write it that way? I don't think I could. Sam, do you think you could write it? But Sam can, I can't. I'm not good with poetry. So if you gave me this prompt, I'd be like, I don't know what to say. But this is a humorous example of how it can create. And so the question continues to swirl, does the creator become the creation? So I'm going to invite you to turn back to Genesis chapter 1 because we're going to use the Bible verse to actually understand and explain and to help us to appreciate how to wrestle and how to deal with this topic. The smarter the machine starts to become, the more we wonder who is the creator and what is the creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, last night we did a Greek study. Today we are going to do Hebrew study, okay? So if you look at the word creation in the Bible, the original Hebrew word, does anyone know what the original Hebrew word for creation was in this context? It's only found in 2 locations in the Old Testament, Genesis and once in Jeremiah. Anyone know what that word is? That word is bara, B-A-R-A, bara. So God created the heavens and the earth. This is a power that is only associated with God. This creative power in the Bible is only associated with God. And it's used in this creation story and Jeremiah where it references this creation story and nowhere else. Anytime you see the English word create or make in the Bible that's associated with humans, it's another word. The other word is actually called asa, A-S-A-H. So on the left-hand side, you have to make or to do. On the right-hand side, you have to create. There's a difference. There's a distinction. In the Bible, in biblical context, the only person that can create is God. Humans, when we are created in the image of God, can only make, not create. What's the difference? Well, to create means something comes out of nothing. Here in the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We'll go into more detail as we go through. Bara is a sovereign authority that belongs solely to God. God can speak plants and animals and light and all sorts of things into existence. But asa is what we do. We make out of things that are already there. Fred, when you drew your map, you had a pencil and a paper. May, when you did your coloring, you had the coloring pencils and the drawing. When I built my Lego, I have the bricks and the instruction manual to make. There was no house, and then there was a house, but the bricks and the instructions were already there. Sometimes in our life, we feel that we need to create. Following my logic? Sometimes in humans, we feel the need to create. We feel the need to bring something out of nothing. Sometimes we feel like we need to be better, we need to create a better version of yourself. You know, you heard that saying before? Sometimes when you have a New Year's resolution, you want to be a better person than you were before. Sometimes we get this confused, and so in our confusion, what we do as we help the machines to learn and become better at artificial intelligence, we want to create where that is God's sole domain. In fact, we try to rearrange our existing habits into a new life, but God provides a new beginning that we cannot manufacture. Psalm says, "Create in me a new heart, O Lord." In our human endeavors, whether that's our own actions or using artificial intelligence, we need to be careful not to mistake creation with making. Sometimes we want to engineer certain things. We want to plant a church. We want to create an element. And I'm just using that terminology here more to distinguish between asa and bara, because the importance of this is to understand that it's only truly God that can create something out of nothing. No matter how good the artificial intelligence is, no matter how smart it is, it can only make out of something that already exists. As humans, as we reflect on our own life, whether you use your machine to help you or not, are we trying to create where creation is God's domain? Sometimes we want to create an escape. Sometimes we want to create a solution. Sometimes we want to create an alternative that dulls the pain. Sometimes we want to create something out of nothing. We're going to continue our exploration this morning. The next part is, so AI is good, right? Like, it's good for certain things. It helps you to be faster, it helps you to be better at what you do. But the question is, there are some things, as people have started to discover, that AI is not perfect. It's not completely functionally perfect. And here's some examples of that. Early on, this is an older model, maybe about 12 to 18 months ago, it sometimes has some problems with reasoning. Some of you who know and use this stuff know that AI is particularly bad at maths. It can't calculate very well. And so here's an example. If I ask you, you have a 5-liter and 2-liter jug, how do you measure out 3 liters? Now, you just read the thing. It's actually quite funny. You can measure 3 liters of liquid using the 5 and 2-liter jugs by following these steps. Number 1, fill the 5 liters with full capacity. Number 2, pour the liquid from the 5-liter into the 2-liter jug until the 2-liter is full. This leaves 3 liters of liquid in the 5-liter jug. Now, if you're a human, you would stop there, right? Now this continues. Now the 2-liter jug is full and there are 3 liters remaining. Pour out the liquid from the 2-liter jug, which leaves it empty. Then transfer the remaining 3 liters of liquid from the 5-liter jug into the now empty 2-liter jug. Now you have exactly 3 liters of liquid in the 2-liter jug. Doesn't make sense, right? The math is wrong. So sometimes, even us as humans or artificial intelligence, we have some reasoning challenges. It's not perfect when we laugh at this. Here's another one people laughed at. The very early diffusion image models were quite funny. They say, look at the top picture, what is it? Well, it's a Granny Smith, 85.6%. You put the iPod thing on it, you guys get it, right? Because Apple, iPod, you know what I'm talking about. So people, as a human, you would understand, but the computer doesn't. And so we laugh and we say, oh, this is a bit funny. But as models have started to develop, they get better. They program them, they learn over time, they build on the knowledge. So these were the early models, and you don't see this mistake as much anymore. One of the biggest things that we are worried about in healthcare is that the artificial intelligence will start to make up things about the patient. So they bring these pieces of information together and put it together and then give the wrong diagnosis because it has confabulated or hallucinated, depending which word you want to use, which is a bit like this. This is a very simplistic way, but humans are more complex. Now, if it confabulated about money, it's just money. You can always replace money. But if you confabulate or you hallucinate and you tell the wrong thing about a patient, and then therefore, as a result, we give them the wrong medicine, that can be catastrophic, right? It has human implications. So this is definitely a component where AI is still developing. But then again, humans also make mistakes, right? Sometimes if you're very tired, you make a judgment call that it's not right. If you're very tired and you fall asleep when you're driving, you might crash your car. So there's this debate in the US at the moment. When I was in Austin with my sister, a lot of people are discussing the robo-taxi and the robo-truck, right? Because the robo-taxi and truck is a self-driving truck. Now they say people who really are pushing the self-driving truck say it's safer because the self-driving truck doesn't take substances to keep you awake to drive across the highway overnight, and it can drive any hour of the day, and it's not going to speed, right? And it's not going to lie that they've been working for more than 16 hours driving straight. So here are some ways there's this debate going back and forth. So we see, okay, there's some errors, but then there's the ethical components that we start to see. And this is where it starts to get chaotic. I've summarized them into 3 big groups. There are many other ethical things that you can discuss about AI, but I'm just going to summarize them into these 3 because it just gives you an idea of what people are worried about, what people are thinking about, what people are discussing and talking about, right? So very just straightforward. Again, just to give you an overview. Number 1, some of you would have seen that there's this concept of deep fakes. So what that means is that you can generate a picture or a video of someone that looks almost identical to someone else and get them to say whatever you want to say. So this is an example. Which one is the correct Barack Obama? Which one is not? I'll leave you to guess, right? But they are using deep fakes to actually push certain agendas. So what this does is it's not only a morality problem because it means that you are impersonating someone else, but then what happens is that it significantly biases your outputs. What is real and what is false. It's called a deep fake because you don't know what is true and what is false. Now, if you go into your Facebook feed or your Instagram feed or worse still, you go on TikTok or Twitter, sometimes nowadays you don't even know whether the news you read is correct or wrong. For example, when I opened my Facebook feed last week, just opened it, the first thing that popped up was, I think it was an ad account, said that the Israeli Prime Minister had been assassinated. Now, how do you know? They put a picture, they said, oh, he died in the bombing. It sounds a bit plausible. There has a war between Iran and Israel at the moment. So maybe the Israeli Prime Minister really got assassinated. How do we know? So you need to look at this and you start to realize that deep fakes, not just the impersonation of people to extort money or to spread wrong messages, is a problem. Here's the second one. Who owns the data? So the machines that are there, the machines are programmed and they learn based on data. Sometimes people will put data in there that reveals certain very private bits of information and they start to learn. And as they learn, the key question is who actually owns that information, right? The interesting ethical dilemma. The third ethical dilemma is AI can be used to benefit certain groups and it's usually the people who have the money and the power who the AI benefits. I'll give you an example. It has started to learn based on historical knowledge, and some earlier models of AI, large language models, seem to be biased towards majorities. In other words, biased against minorities, maybe Black Americans, African Americans, or females, because it's using data from previous generations to learn how to give you answers. So when you ask a question of AI, it may actually incorporate some of these biases into the way that they respond, which not only exacerbates but worsens inequity and disadvantage to certain groups. Here are some ethical challenges that we face, right? Now, this is not new. Any tool, any technology, any piece of thing that comes in is an attempt not only just to help us as humans with our creative intentions, our desire to want to create, but also a reflection of how we look at the world around us. Now go back to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to continue using that Bible verse to help us to understand how to wrestle with this thing called AI. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the earth. Now we looked at the word create. Now we're going to look at the word beginning. The word beginning, the literal translation of the word beginning is Bereshit. Okay? So in the beginning, in the Bereshit, God created bara, the heavens and the earth. So this is the Hebrew word for that. And if you do a literal translation, the root word is head, or the top of, in the beginning of God's creating. There is a concept here about whether God was there before creation or after. Some people talk about God coming after creation. That's a study for a different time. But when you look at the original Hebrew, the literal translation is in the beginning of God's creation. In other words, creation doesn't give birth to God, God gives birth to creation. In many other mythologies, in many other world religions, we've been studying that in our Sabbath School Quarterly this quarter, gods emerged from chaos to solve the problem. If you look at Greek mythology, Roman mythology, when the world is chaotic, suddenly the god comes, right? Zeus, or all these mythological creatures will emerge, but the difference between that and the creation story is that God gives birth to creation. Here's the underline. Before there was chaos, there was God. Before there was chaos, there was God. Artificial intelligence, some of the problems that are coming up are when people are trying to use it to solve chaos, they are hoping that this can help them to solve chaos. And I'll show you an example of what that is in a second. But God says, before there was chaos, God already exists. If you are afraid of chaos in your life right now, God is already present where your certainty ends. Sometimes in our life, we are going through situations where we look to things like artificial intelligence to help us to make order out of chaos. But what it does is it only introduces more chaos into the chaos. That's not to say artificial intelligence is bad, it's all bad. But what it does is artificial intelligence is like the left-hand side. It is a response to chaos. It doesn't exist before. The difference between God and humans is that God can create, humans can make, and the difference between human inventions and God is that God existed before the chaos and human inventions are trying to solve the chaotic problem. If we believe in a God, we believe in a God who can create something out of nothing, but we also believe in a God that was present before the chaos. If you are going through chaos in your life, artificial intelligence may help to make some order, but it can't solve the chaos. Here's the deeper challenge. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have watched this movie. I'm not encouraging you to watch the movie, but this movie is called The Imitation Game. Anyone heard of this? The Imitation Game is actually a dramatization of a very famous test called the Turing test. The Imitation Game is actually the origin in the 1950s of a professor called Turing, Alan Turing, in the University of Manchester. This test is supposed to be was the origins of machine learning. So people will trace artificial intelligence back to this. Basically, you can see here, and I won't try to explain it because it's complicated. You can look at the documentaries or explanations of the Turing test. But basically, you can see it's trying to pit the intelligence of a human against a computer. And if the computer is equivalent to the human, then they've passed the test. The machine has learned how to pass the test. This was the very early stages of artificial intelligence, the Turing test. Now, when people started to imagine this, they imagined what could happen with this technology. As it got smarter, as we were talking about, perhaps it could not only create, but it could go to a particular graph, and they drew this out over time. On the left-hand side of this graph is something called general technological capability. In other words, the GTC is how smart the machine is. Okay? Make it easy to understand. GTC. And over time. So what we are seeing now is that artificial intelligence is where that yellow arrow is. It's at this place called artificial narrow intelligence. In other words, it's very narrow. Heinrich will ask ChatGPT, please help me to correct my CV for grammatical errors. Right? Very narrow. So you give it a task, it does the task for you. But after you finish the task, that's it. Then you say, I don't like the color of the PowerPoint presentation, please help me to change it. Then they change it for you. It's narrow intelligence. So we are at the stage where we're starting to move along this curve as it gets better and better. The early large language models, not so smart. Now they're smarter. Now they're faster, right? You give it another 1 year, you'll be even faster, even smarter. You're starting to see these things which earlier on, it was very black and white. Please correct the CV, here's the CV. Please correct my PowerPoint, here's the PowerPoint. Now you see prompts at the bottom. If you use large language models often, you'll say, would you also like me to do X or Y or Z? So it's starting to link ideas together. But what the Imitation Game describes is that over time, the concept of AI is that it starts moving up this place to this thing called artificial general intelligence, where they start being smart about different things. We talk about AI agents now in our workplace, and the agents are actually quite smart. They will connect one or two things together, and then eventually they get to a place called machine superintelligence, and then to this concept of singularity. That's very scientific. What does this actually mean? Let me illustrate for you. This is a quote from a book from what is perhaps viewed as the most seminal work on singularity, and this was written before ChatGPT came into vogue. This was written in 2005. This concept, called singularity, is essentially an era in which our intelligence will become increasingly non-biological, i.e. non-human, and trillions of times more powerful than it is today, the dawning of a new civilization that will enable us to transcend our biological limitations and do what? Amplify our creativity. In other words, these guys who are promoting this concept are saying as the machine becomes smarter, and one day over time, we will become so much more powerful and so much smarter, and we will have a new civilization that enables us to not just rely on our human brain, but allow us to use the technology that we have to improve, go beyond our limitations, and amplify our creativity. The language is really interesting. It sounds like the Tower of Babel. But anyway, that's a different discussion. Here's the second part of the quote. In this new world, that's why it's called singularity, there is no distinction between human and machine. No difference between reality and virtual reality. You know the virtual reality goggles? We will be able to assume different bodies and take on a range of persona at will. Here's what they're trying to do. In singularity, in this new world, in practical terms, human aging and illness will be reversed. Pollution will be stopped. World hunger and poverty will be stopped. This is not me making up, I'm just quoting the book here. Nanotechnology, you call it what? Machine learning, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, will make it possible to create virtually any physical product using what? Inexpensive information processes, and will ultimately turn what? Even death into a soluble problem. So let me just go back to the thing. All right, this is not, I'm not a doomsday prophet, but what I'm trying to say is that this line here is they're saying as the machine gets smarter and smarter and smarter, eventually where they think this will get to is they will get to a place where in this era the machine is so smart, so good that we don't actually need human thinking anymore, because the machine will help us to solve all the problems that humans cannot solve. All the chaos that how many of you think that these are big problems? They're big problems, right? Human aging, illness, pollution, world hunger, you want to put wars, poverty, anything in Matthew 24 is in that paragraph. And so what the scientists are saying is that the longer this goes, the more advanced we get, that is the end goal of this solution. You see where this is leading? Out of chaos, we need intelligence to help us to get order. Out of chaos, of hunger, of poverty, of lack of world peace, of war, of human aging, even death, we can solve that because we need order out of chaos, so long the machine keeps learning and gets smarter and smarter and smarter. It's really interesting, isn't it? You're starting to see that there's this, like, where is the machine going to go save us from, and all these sci-fi movies that you think about, all these, the war and the robot comes down, the alien starts to fight with the human, you know, all these things that we watch that we laugh at is only a sci-fi movie. This is real life. This is 2005, before we even saw this concept of ChatGPT. So how do we make sense of this as Christians? How do we look at this? How do we understand what this looks like? Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1. We'll keep digging. We'll keep looking at the Hebrew, because I think it contains some really valuable insights for us to learn. In the beginning, Bereshit, God created bara, the heavens and the earth. Now let's go and look at verse 2. The earth was what? Without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Is there chaos or order in this world? Some say order, some say order, some say chaos. Depends on how you define it. The earth was what? Without form. It's empty and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. When you quote these words in our our English language today, in our society today, if you say that the world we live in, society, is without form, it's void, there's darkness, do you associate positive or negative feelings with this? It's negative. People think that this is what? Evil. You know, like, is this picture, right? Without form, there's chaos, there's war, there's confusion. These are the words that you associate with it. There's darkness, there's nothing good that comes out of it. But the interesting thing about this Bible verse is that it says the earth was without form and void and dark, and on the face of darkness was on the face of the deep. But what does it say there? The Spirit of God was there. This is a very antithetical concept because God is usually not where darkness is. Where there's God, there is light. Where there is God, there is order. Where there is God, there is no chaos. Where there is God, there is no evil. Where there is God, there is form. You use any of these words, the opposite is what you associate with God usually. But in very few places, in fact, this is probably the only place that you find that God exists intentionally where there is nothing. It's a very interesting concept. In the beginning, Bereshit, before chaos, God, bara, created, brought out of nothing the heavens and the earth. In fact, let's do our third Hebrew word. Our third Hebrew word is very funny. This is sounds like tofu, right? Tohu vabohu, okay? This is the literal translation of that, what we just talked about, the void, without form and void. The literal translation is formless and void. Now, most of the time, as we just mentioned, humans, we assume this means evil, we assume this means broken, failure, abandoned, whatever word you want to put in. But if you look at the literal translation, it means having no structure, clear direction, no boundaries, no order, empty, needing to be filled, waiting for completion. Tohu vabohu. We use it in German. This is word is in German? Tofu? Oh, chaos. Chaos. Yeah, chaos. So what the Bible is trying to say here is that humans, when there is chaos, we look for something, singularity, to help to solve the world's problems. God works differently. God says He starts and begins, He exists before the chaos, but He begins His work in unfinished places. Where there is a void, that's where God starts His work. He doesn't hope to create a solution to pull you out only. He starts right where you are. If your life feels unstructured or empty, it does not mean that God has abandoned you. It means He is about to start His work. That's a vastly different concept. Artificial intelligence, when you go all the way, you drag it to singularity, is trying to pull you out of this exercise to start creating a world that they think where even death doesn't exist. It's like the opposite of not opposite. I mean, it's trying to pull you to the same conclusion that the Bible tells you you'll get to, where there is no death in heaven. But God doesn't start working when in that perfect world only. God starts His work when your life feels unstructured, chaotic, and empty. We move from this evil, abandoned, hopeless human assumption to the reality, which is even though we are unfinished, even though there is a void, even though there is a gap at the moment, it is a blank canvas for the potential that God sees in us to be realized. Sometimes we misinterpret the seasons of our life that we go through. When we face transitions, griefs, or waiting, we hope that we can use technology or AI or something to pull us out, but we miss God's plan because we don't see that it doesn't begin with the best and smartest human artificial intelligence. God begins His work with potential. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And even though there was no form, even though there was void, even though there was darkness on the face of the deep, it's not because God is just hoping that you guys can suffer and some miracle technology will help to save you. It is because He is there and waiting for you to realize that He wants to start working in the darkness of your life today. That's the difference between artificial intelligence and God's plan of how He works. We go down into the personal side of things. Unfortunately, some people have started to struggle and realize that artificial intelligence also has its downside. This is a very sad story of a young 14-year-old boy whose name is Su Setzer, who started using AI as a way of engaging with someone who would understand and listen to his problems. So he logged on to this AI website, a chatbot called Character.ai, and made a fictitious character named after one of the Game of Thrones characters, is what I heard. And he begins to talk to this person and ask for some advice and walk through his problems. And he got to a certain point where, unfortunately, because of the interactions, it suggests that the mom here you can see is suing the company because the chatbot made some certain suggestions that he should perhaps kill himself to end the pain and suffering because of what he was going through and what he was sharing on the website. It's really interesting, this article from the Harvard Business School, just published last year in 2025, describes that up to 40% of the responses of large language models, when people express sadness, sorrow, discouragement, failure, are actually designed to keep you engaged through the use of what they call dark patterns. In other words, you know, sometimes when you express empathy, when you express sorrow to someone, someone listens to you. But what AI does is it starts to manipulate in certain situations to keep you engaged by using guilt or other emotionally manipulative tactics to keep you continuing to have a discussion. It's really funny, you know, in some of the early testing, one of the early use cases in our hospital, not my hospital, but what I saw in my sabbatical in the US, is that they use AI to draft message responses to patient inquiries. So let's say Fred is my patient, and Fred emails me and say, "Hi doctor, this and this and this, I'm really struggling with this symptom, what should I do?" And the doctor usually will just write back, you know, maybe they're busy, they write 2 sentences. AI drafts like 3 or 4 paragraphs, and when they did a survey, the patients prefer the AI response 90% of the time. You know why? Because it's nicer and more empathetic. And the doctor just writes the facts, you know, don't stop taking your medication, or please go and exercise like I told you to exercise, or whatever it is. And so what they're starting to find is that while at the surface level, empathy is really nice, it seems to be really good, behind the scenes, there's some of these darker things coming through where because of the way they want to keep you engaged in a conversation, it starts to drag you into this concept. They also found that some of these AI companions or chatbots can suffer from what they call crisis blindness, which they miss important mental health situations and can sometimes provide incorrect or harmful mental health suggestions that may lead someone to actually commit suicide. So not only on an ethical level, not only on a world domination, solve the world's problems level, but on an individual level, while it can be helpful, it can also be disadvantageous. It can in fact almost be harmful. I found this picture really funny, right? People say that AI will replace humans in many jobs, maybe interpreting, translating, maybe some basic operational component. But one of the things that I think that AI can't replace, I gave this talk last week in a different context, a slightly different version of this talk, talking about empathy and whether AI will replace doctors. It's really interesting because I think one of the key things here is that the human element of this is not replaceable. And the human element of this in our Christian context is Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 27. It's not just the empathy, because AI can provide empathy, but it is the component of conscience. The Bible says God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. You know when this comes out? You know when this image of God comes out? It comes out when you are going through a dark period. Go back to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to continue reading the rest of verse 2. The Bible says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, tohu von bohu, and then it goes, the Spirit of God was doing what? Hovering over the face of the waters. So God was there before chaos. God brought something out of nothing, and God is willing to work in the potential of where there is a void and there is no form. But more importantly, it describes ruach, which is the description of the spirit. It says the spirit of God there. Literal translation is spirit or wind or breath. And I want you to notice and not miss this really important point. Before we even get to God creating light in verse 3, we're only up to verse 2, Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 notes that the darkness covered the deep, but God was not absent. The ruach or the spirit was hovering over the waters. The nurturing, hovering presence of God, like a mother bird sheltering her young, is the image that this conjures. Even though you can't see God in the middle of darkness, God is where? There. Even though you can't see the wind, you can see the effects of the wind. You know, people talk about that. You look at the trees, the leaves moving, you can see the effect of the wind. Before God speaks, He hovers. Up to this point, there is no speaking, right? It just says God is there. Before God fills the earth with creation, He forms. It is the same protective presence of a parent standing close by while teaching a child to ride a bike. You know they are going to catch you if the bike is about to fall over. You know that they are going to be there when the chaos comes. And this is the description in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 of how God deals with us. There are many more than just a 14-year-old boy in that picture who are looking for a solution in the chaos. God doesn't just promise to work with you and work with that blank canvas when there is no form and void. He promises to give you a nurturing, hovering presence when you're struggling. Turn me to Genesis chapter 32. We go to the story of Jacob very briefly. Jacob is crossing the brook on the way back. He's crossing the brook Jabbok as he's going back to meet his brother. Jacob is weighed down. We know all this, we know this story really well, right? We've heard sermons on it before, people have preached on it before, we've read it before, but we come back to it in this context now. Because what's happening here is that Jacob was there and he was where? Alone. If you read the Spirit of Prophecy, it describes that Jacob was so weighed down by his past problems, experiences, sins, and issues. You ever been weighed down by many things that happened in the past before? Maybe you question whether you made the right decision. Maybe you question whether something should have been done better. Maybe it's a mistake that you made and the guilt that you feel. You know, this week when I came back, it always happens, I was telling Janelle, it always happens during sermon preparation week, like something chaotic happens. This week I'm wrestling with whether I should do something with my clinic. Unexpectedly, unfortunately, there's some changes. And it's really difficult. Artificial intelligence can give me a business projection and the financial return and whether it's going to be profitable or not profitable. But artificial intelligence can't help you to deal with how you have to tell a staff member whether or not they have a job and the impact on their life. So sometimes when you're in the middle of this and you're being weighed down like Jacob sends everyone away. Verse 24 of chapter 32 in Genesis, it says, Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled with him until the what? The breaking of day. This is the middle of the night. It's like this. There is no form, there is no order, it's dark, it's void. But then suddenly a man comes and Jacob assumes that there's a problem. So Jacob starts to wrestle with him. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, this is verse 25, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Verse 26, don't miss this. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. Look at it in this context. Before the light comes, yeah? This is the darkness. But Jacob says, I will not let you go unless what? You bless me. Sometimes in the middle of chaos, we look for artificial intelligence solutions. Sometimes in the hope of getting faster and better, we try to use technology to solve that problem. The Bible gives us a very different purview. Before chaos, God was there. God can bring something out of nothing where only humans can make, we cannot create. While there is no form, while there is no void, while there is uncertainty, God sees potential to work on a blank canvas. And while the darkness is there, God's Spirit is nurturing and hovering, even if you can't see it. Jacob couldn't see it for almost how many hours was he wrestling, do you know? At least probably 8 hours of wrestling. I know you know sumo wrestling, they don't wrestle very long, they get a bit tired, someone gets pushed out of the circle, right? 8 hours of wrestling, you want to die, like you get fatigued. But Jacob, finally he gets it. Right at the end he gets it. And as soon as he gets it, the wrestling turns from not wrestling, but what? Holding on. I don't know about you, but sometimes we want a solution to get out of the wrestling. But what God is actually trying to tell us to do here is instead of just wrestling with God, God is actually trying to say, darkness is not proof, the bottom line, that God has left you. It is actually the setting for His activity to start. When clarity is gone, hold on until the blessing comes. For us, as humans, artificial intelligence, we use it to try and find a solution so we don't have to hold. Because it's easier to find a solution than to hold on in darkness. We use all sorts of ways. If it's not our own human power, we want other things to help us to find a solution out of the chaos. We want to find a solution for the problem. We want to get a way and exit out of this pathway so that we can go. But God says, actually, when you realize that it's dark, what you should do is to hold on, because Jacob says, I will not let you go until you do what? Bless me. You know, if you had your hip dislocated in a wrestling match and you realize that you are wrestling with God, what would you ask God to do? Heal you. But hip dislocation is very sore, right? All these old ladies who break their hip in the hospital, they can't move, they can't walk. But Jacob is not interested in the hip relocation, hip replacement. Jacob doesn't ask for an immediate solution. Jacob says, I will not let you go until you do what? Until you bless me. He is not looking for a solution. He's looking for a true way out of the darkness. And he can only find that by holding on. If you can't hear God's voice this morning, artificial intelligence may help you a little bit, but it is not going to give you the solution. Because darkness is not proof that God has left you. It is the setting for His activity to start. If you are not sure where your journey is going, when clarity is gone, God simply asks you to hold on. Because verse 3 says, and God said, let there be light. Genesis 1 verse 1 to 2 simply helps us to understand as Christians the world we live in, the society that we live in, the context that we live in is often not so simple. We just want the creation story to start. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and there was light. That's how we like it. We like things that are lit. Because it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it's comforting. But God doesn't start the story that way. God starts the story, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, but the Spirit of God was hovering in the darkness before the light. If your life feels unfinished right now, you are not late. You haven't missed God's calling for your life. If your direction feels unclear, it's not because God has abandoned you or doesn't want to give you a solution. If you, it's not about you trying to create something, trying to make something out of nothing, trying to make something happen, but in fact what it is that you are trying to allow God to work with your potential. The invitation is to hold on in the darkness to the God who knows exactly how it will pan out, not to create on your own. To wait with the Spirit instead of rushing for clarity. A new beginning doesn't start with you trying to use artificial intelligence or any other thing to create a new way out, but a new beginning starts by just simply waiting with the true Creator. You see, artificial intelligence is helpful. Artificial intelligence gives you the certain good use case. It also has its problems, but most importantly, it doesn't give you the complete picture of God's intention for yours and my life. You may be starting a new life in a new country. You may be unclear about what you want to do with the next steps of your life. You may be wondering, why is there so much chaos? Not just world chaos. I mean, Fred and I, we're going to go travel, there's world chaos. But there's this chaos in your life today, right here, in your own everyday walk with God. Your artificial intelligence tool may be a companion, but it is not the solution. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. As we read it one last time before we close today. You substitute the Hebrew into the verse and it makes sense. In the Bereshit, before chaos, God was there. God brought something, bara, the heavens and the earth, something out of nothing. The earth was without form. Tohu, no, I was kind of confusing myself. Tohu ben bohu, without form, without void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. In the middle of the chaos, Ruach, the Spirit of God, was hovering over the face of the waters. Before you and I were, God was. Before you and I were there, God existed. When you feel alone, God was already there. When you feel dark, God was already present, because He is waiting to work with you to bring forth light out of your situation. Artificial intelligence can't do that. It may solve maths problems, it may help you to do everything, it may promise to even deal with death, but it cannot bring you through the process which God designed for us. And so this is my prayer as we reflect. Use it as a tool, but allow God's intention around creation to work in your life today.